Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulihil kareem, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. So now we move to Egypt now, to Misr. And we said that, what year is this? What year is this? 199. Okay, because we said Al-Ma'mun took power at 198. And this was a Shafi'i's methodology that he wanted to avoid this nonsense that was about to take place. Now someone might say, was that a cop-out? Was he avoiding the fitna altogether? Actually, one of the reasons why a Shafi'i goes to Egypt as well is because the people in Egypt are not buying into this nonsense and they're far away from Al-Ma'mun. So they're not falling for it. They're not getting into Al-Mu'tazila and to these things. Al-Ma'mun was very harsh on the people in Iraq in particular, because that's where the home base is. In fact, he even had written on the top of the masajid, I just want you to think about this, he even had it inscribed on the top of the masajid in Iraq, in Baghdad, Kalamullah makhluq. Okay? That the words of Allah are created, that this is all creation. So he was really trying very hard to enforce that ideology on behalf of the Mu'tazila. Ash-Shafi'i could battle those ideas from Egypt. So he continues to comment on the Mu'tazila thought and on the thought of what's going on and on the trial of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, which comes up after this. But Egypt was a place where he could go and he could really develop himself and refine his ideas further. And subhanAllah, when he went to Egypt, he was welcomed by many students, he was welcomed by many scholars. It really did turn out to be a great place for him. And this is where you find that there's a transition in his madhab as well. There's the old Shafi'i madhab and the new Shafi'i madhab, which even the Shafi'is call al-madhab al-qadim wal-madhab al-jadid. The old madhab and the new madhab. Alright? Why? Because a Shafi'i, and just by virtue of him changing the vast majority of his fatwa, they say that he had 80 fatwas in al-Hujjah in Iraq, 80 fatwas, and he only kept 16 of them for Egypt. Alright? The fact that he understood context in fiqh, again, which is one of the biggest issues that we have now, is that you go online and you find the fatwa from someone that lives in a completely different social context. Even if that scholar is brilliant and amazing, it's not necessarily going to apply to your context. The Shafi'i understands that, he goes to Egypt, so he refines his ideas as a result of two things. Number one, encountering the people of Egypt, so they needed fatwas for themselves. Number two, a Shafi'i at this point had encountered basically all of the different schools of thought in the ummah. So a Shafi'i now has a greater idea of everything, and in Egypt in particular, one of the reasons he went there was because this was where Al-Layth ibn Sa'd was based. Now, I don't know if you guys remember this, but we said yesterday, Al-Layth ibn Sa'd was the guy, he was the scholar of Ahl al-Hadith in Egypt. And Imam al-Shafi'i said about Al-Layth ibn Sa'd that he's more deserving of a madhab than Malik. Alright? So Al-Layth ibn Sa'd is an incredibly knowledgeable scholar of hadith, but because maybe Egypt was a little bit disconnected as opposed to where everything was going on, inside Al-Hijaz and Iraq, that could be the reason why his madhab never gained traction and so on and so forth. Al-Shafi'i never got to meet him. Al-Layth passed away in the year 175. So Al-Shafi'i, even though he was 25 years old, he never got to meet Layth because he never got to go to Egypt. And Layth ibn Sa'd established himself in Egypt. But when he got to Egypt, he saw all the students of Al-Layth. It was very much so Al-Layth's madhab, his school of thought, that was the predominant school of thought in Egypt at that time. And Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala loved Al-Layth. In fact, when he went to Egypt, the first place he went to was the grave of Al-Layth ibn Sa'd, and he made dua for him. Okay, so he loved him, and this was a chance for him to encounter his ideas as well, and encounter his students. Shafi'i also did something very interesting as well. He said that the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is that when you go to a place, if you have maternal uncles there, al-khal, that you should stay with them. He said because the Prophet ﷺ, when he got to Medina, he stayed with some of the relatives from his mother's side, the uncles from his mother's side. So Shafi'i said, if you can, when he says maternal uncles, he means it in the extended sense, al-khal in the extended sense, right? Right, the relatives from your mother's side, your maternal relatives. Shafi'i had some relatives from his mother's side that were in Egypt, so he found out who they were and he stayed with them to follow that sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. to stay with some of the mother's relatives. So he gets there, and he goes to the grave of Al-Layth. He makes dua for him, and he assumes the place. SubhanAllah, it was just natural. He assumes the place that Al-Layth used to teach from. Even though this is now 24 years later, Shafi'i is going to assume the position that Al-Layth had in Egypt, and that was that he was going to teach in the masjid of Amr ibn al-As. The main masjid in Egypt, you can see it up there on the screen. This is the masjid of Amr ibn al-As. This is and it was established obviously because Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu was the one who conquered Egypt in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. This right here is the first masjid in Africa. All right, this is the first masjid in Africa. It's the masjid that, and yes, Egypt's part of Africa. For those of you that try to deny that, all right. But it's the first masjid there, and so it was assumed that this was the primary masjid. This was the masjid where the greatest scholar was going to teach from, and so Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, he assumed that position. That's an internal view, and these are external shots of Masjid Amr bin As. Until now, it's there. It's a very beautiful masjid. You know the picture of Malcolm X rahimahullah making dua, same masjid, subhanallah. So these are shots of Masjid Amr bin As. And so he starts to teach there, and again, his madhab now had grown, it had advanced. And he writes a new work which is called Kitab al-Umm. Kitab al-Umm. So this is going to be his fatwa and his opinions. And he revises al-Risala once again in Egypt for a final time. His legal theory, he refines his thought in that. And he writes Kitab al-Umm, and these become the two famous works in the Shafi'i madhab that were written by Imam al-Shafi'i himself. Okay? So also in Egypt, by the way, and this is perhaps, this is like one of my favorite things about Egypt. He meets one of his favorite teachers, and she is a woman. One of al-Shafi'i's greatest teachers, he considered her from his top 5 teachers, was actually a woman by the name of Nafisa bint al-Hasan. Nafisa bint al-Hasan. Okay? Nafisa bint al-Hasan, rahimahullah, may Allah have mercy on her, she was the daughter-in-law, so you can see there's some rich history here. She's the daughter-in-law of an Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. All right, she's married to the son of Ja'far al-Sadiq, whose name is Ishaq. So she's the daughter-in-law of Ja'far al-Sadiq. She's the granddaughter of Al-Hasan ibn Ali. So she's the great-great-granddaughter of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She was born in Mecca. And eventually they moved to Egypt. Her family moved to Egypt. She was a master of fiqh and she was a master of hadith, which is why Shafi'i was attracted to her ideology, because she'd mastered the two sciences. Back then you have to understand that there was almost a division. You either master fiqh or you master hadith. Okay? She mastered both sciences. She became an authority in both fiqh and hadith. So Shafi'i considered her one of the most knowledgeable ones of her time. Plus, she was known for her zuhd. She was an ascetic, a worshipper, a abida. She was known for her righteousness. And Imam Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah, says in Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, he says that she was the most charitable person in Egypt. And she especially used to donate to those with special needs. Okay? Shameless plug-in Muhsin. All right? She especially used to take care of people with special needs. So Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah, says this was a charitable woman. She made Hajj over 30 times. And Shafi'i knew about her. And when Shafi'i got to Egypt, he immediately dedicated himself to her majalis and to her halaqat. And Shafi'i used to visit her house every day and used to ask her questions. Shafi'i reviewed both al-Umm and al-Risala with her. I mean, this woman is not no joke, all right? She's not just a lady that teaches some tajweed on this. No, she is not that a lady that teaches tajweed would be a joke, by the way. I'm not saying that. I just need to make that very clear. Tajweed is awesome. Tajweed is important. Quran. I'm saying that she wasn't just considered like someone that's going to just teach a little bit of Quran. She is a master muhadditha, a master of hadith, a master of fiqh. Okay, and Shafi'i rahimahullah goes to her, and subhanallah, we're going to see that she comes up in the time of his death. By the way, so he took from all the scholars of Egypt, all the scholars of Mecca, all the scholars of Medina. Okay? He took from all of the scholars of Iraq, all of the scholars of Yemen when he was in Najran. So he encountered each and every single school of thought in the Ummah. And this is what makes him the person that he is. That he developed an understanding, a tolerance, and he merged the best practices of all of these schools of thought. And then of course his students. Okay? Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala is his greatest student. And he used to say, Imam Ahmad said about Shafi'i, الناس عيال على فقه الشافعي. The same thing that Shafi'i said about Abu Hanifa, Ahmad said about him, that everyone is a dependent child on a Shafi'i when it comes to fiqh. Abdullah ibn Ahmad, the son of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he said that my father used to constantly make dua for a Shafi'i. Like I'd always hear Imam Ahmad making dua for a Shafi'i. So he said, I asked him, why do you keep making dua for him? And listen to what he says. He says, Shafi'i, that Imam al-Shafi'i, كالشمس للدنيا وكالعافية للناس. Shafi'i is like the sun. What he means to the world is like what the sun means to the earth, and what health means to people. فانظر هل لهذين من خلف أو منهما عوض. If these two things are taken away from people, if the sun is taken away from the earth, is there any hope for it? Will it ever be restored? And if health is taken away from you, essentially you die. Can it be restored? So he's saying that this is what Shafi'i means to the world. So this is when Shafi'i was still alive. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah used to constantly make dua for him. And Imam Ahmad rahimahullah said, anyone who owns a pen or an ink pot has the favor of a Shafi'i on his back. Meaning a Shafi'i gets the reward of anyone that's ever owned a pen or an ink pot after him because of what he contributed to knowledge. Then you have another student by the name of Ismail ibn Yahya al-Muzani. Imam Ismail ibn Yahya al-Muzani. Imam al-Muzani is a fascinating character. He drove a Shafi'i crazy because he was like a Shafi'i. Alright? In the sense that his debating skills, his brain, his knowledge, the things that he'd come up with, subhanAllah, the man was a genius. And a Shafi'i recognized that about him. And the way he meets a Shafi'i, by the way, is he comes to a Shafi'i in the masjid and he says to him, prove to me that ijma' exists. That consensus of the scholars is an asl in the religion. Because it was just generally accepted that ijma', that the ummah does not agree upon something that's wrong. That ijma' is part of the usul. That if the companions agreed upon something, then it was to be taken. It was law. No one had ever debated that before. Al-Muzani said, no, I need you to prove it to me from legal theory. So Shafi'i was like, who asked that question, right? Who even asked that? So Shafi'i went and prepared this long research to answer Al-Muzani. Al-Muzani said, that's good, now can I be your student? So Shafi'i said, fine, you can be my student. So he took him in, and subhanAllah, this is, by the way, the beauty of it, when you look at a Shafi'i, he was much younger than most of his students. Right? It shows you, subhanAllah, that the humility of the people. They had a kid that didn't reach puberty teaching 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds in the haram. And people dedicated themselves as his students when he was still in his 20s, when he was still in his 30s. He had students that were 70, 80 years old. All right? Most of his students were significantly older than him. And Shafi'i, he said about Al-Imam al-Muzani, he says, لَوْ نَاظَرَ الشَّيْطَانِ لَغَلَبَ. If he was to debate with the shaitan, he would beat the shaitan in a debate. I mean, this guy's special. He liked him. So he spent his time, he dedicated himself to teaching Al-Imam al-Muzani, rahimahullah ta'ala. He took with him to Egypt, he took with him two students. Where are those two students? Night down the line, I think I lost it. One of them was Rabi' ibn Sulaiman, the one who told him, قَوَّ اللَّهُ ضَعْفَكَ, may Allah increase your weakness. Okay, Rabi' ibn Sulaiman and Abdullah ibn Zubayr al-Humaydi. Al-Imam al-Humaydi and Al-Imam Rabi' ibn Sulaiman, in essence, he took them with him from Iraq to Egypt, so he invested his time in them as well. Now the problem was again, at this point now, the fanatical attachments that people are gaining to their Imams is growing. Okay? And Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah, as we said, he's constantly beating everyone in debates, right? His madhab is proving to be superior, his knowledge is proving to be superior, and he wrote a lot, he wrote extensively. Al-Shafi'i actually wrote over 100 books. Over 100 books. He wrote many, many, many books, many different rasail. And he debated with all of the students from around the world. Egypt became a center of debate. Okay, it became a center of rich debate. So he debated the students of Al-Imam Layth. He debated the students of Imam Malik now, because Al-Shafi'i had sort of merged the principles of Abu Hanifa into the school of Malik. he always seemed to consider himself a Maliki to some extent, right? He always called himself a student and adherent of Imam Malik, but he disagreed with Imam Malik on some things. He debated the students of Imam al-Awza'i from Sham. The students of al-Awza'i made their way to Egypt just to debate al-Shafi'i. Okay? He debated the students of Sufyan al-Thawri. He debated the students of Abu Hanifa. He continued his debates with them. So basically all the other scholars or all the other students of the other madhahib had an issue with him because he was just so brilliant. He was a genius. And particularly those that disliked him the most were the fanatical followers of Imam Malik rahimahullah. Right? Al-Muta'assibin fi madhab Imam Malik. Why? Because they sort of viewed him as a sellout. Okay? They viewed him as a sellout. Like you used to, kuntu tunasiru madhab Malik. You used to defend the madhab of Malik everywhere you went. And he continued to do so. He defended his teacher. He loved Imam Malik rahimahullah. But Ash-Shafi'i, even when Malik was alive, was able to disagree with him. They used to have those discussions, even though Ash-Shafi'i was the young student. So they called him a sellout, they called him names. Okay? And particularly Ash-Shafi'i wrote a book where he illustrated the things he disagreed with Imam Malik with. Now he did that with everyone. But with Imam Malik, it was like, how dare you write about your disagreements with Imam Malik? So he listed some things. And Ash-Shafi'i, he says that I prayed istikhara for an entire year before I released that work, because I knew that it was going to cause some tension. Even though the first page of it is just, or the first portion of it is just praising Imam Malik and how much more knowledgeable Imam Malik was him and that this is his humble student. وَقَالَ الشَّيْخ وَقَالَ الْأُسْتَاذ وَقَالَ الْعَالِمِ. It's not like he wrote a refutation, like one of those nasty PDFs online today. He didn't write a refutation of Imam Malik. It wasn't a refutation. He wrote about the issues where there's khilaf to clarify his madhab, to clarify his own line of thinking, as he did with the other schools as well. However, the fanatical supporters of the madhab of Malik, they hated his guts. So they started to slander him. There was a particular man by the name of Fityan. And Fityan debated with Imam al-Shafi'i, and he debated the things that he disagreed with Malik on. And al-Shafi'i, after the debate, when he walked out, essentially they attacked Imam al-Shafi'i, so they physically beat him. Okay? And that was the first time that, that abuse now, subhanAllah, all of these people. And what did Imam Malik rahimahullah say? That everyone that's in this amr, that's in this affair is going to be harmed some way. He avoided the political turmoil, but now the fanatical madhabism starts. All right? With him. They beat him, almost to a point of being unconscious. The governor of Egypt tried to mediate things and things of that sort, then they did it again. And the time that they beat him again, subhanAllah, it's unclear if that's what caused him his death or not. Meaning it was so severe, the second time that the fanatical followers of the Maliki madhab attacked him, that a lot of sources say that's actually what caused him his death. He became very ill after that, and he was, and this shows you, subhanAllah, how the students are so different from the teachers. None of these Imams wanted cultish behavior or madhabism or my sheikh is better than yours or things of that. None of them wanted that. But the students, unfortunately, that don't understand properly, they take these things and they take them to an extreme. And so Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala becomes very ill, and he was going to pass away in Qahira, in Cairo, on the day of al-Jum'ah, on Yawm al-Jum'ah, on Friday, the 29th of Rajab, and this was in the year 204 after Hijrah, which means how old was al-Shafi'i when he died? Only 54 years old. SubhanAllah, he accomplished all that he accomplished in 54 years. He was the youngest of all of the Imams at the time of his death. All right? He didn't live very long, but he accomplished so much because he started so early, and obviously what his mother did for him at that time. And Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, on his deathbed, he has one of the most beautiful poems that we find. It's called Ilayka. Some of you might have heard it. To you. And it sounds a lot better when it's sung, but I'm not going to sing it. I can sing, but I have a bad throat right now. That's all it is. That's why I'm drinking tea. So I would sing it for you guys another time. And Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, so let's repeat it together. He said, إِلَيْكَ إِلَهُ الْخَلْقِ أَرْفَعُ رَغْبَتِي وَإِن كُنْتُ يَا ذَا الْمَنِّ وَالْجُودِ مُجْرِمًا. So he said, to you, O my Creator, I raise my longing, even if I find myself, O possessor of kindness and generosity, to be an evildoer and a criminal. وَلَمَّا قَسَى قَلْبِي وضاقت مذاهبي. And when my heart became constricted and my paths became narrow, جعلت الرجاء مني لعفوك سلما. That I took my hope in your pardon and your forgiveness as an opening and as an escape. تعاظمني ذنبي فلما قرنته بعفوك كان عفوك أعظما. He says that my sins seemed very great to me, but when I compared them to your forgiveness, I found your forgiveness to be greater than my sins. He says, ما زلت ذا عفو عن الذنب لم تزل. You are and you still remain the only one who can forgive sins. تجود وتعفو منة وتكرما. You grant and you forgive out of your benevolence and out of your generosity. SubhanAllah, these are the last words of Imam al-Shafi'i. These are the last things that Imam al-Shafi'i said as he left this world. This is the area of al-ihtilar. As you're leaving this world and the angels come to the righteous person and they calm them. Where you find that where you find that your hope and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grows as you're leaving this world. So again, he passed away on the day of Friday. This was the 29th of Rajab in the year 204 after Hijrah. And he was only 54 years old, left over 100 books. And subhanAllah, when he died, this is the beautiful thing that I told you I was going to mention about one of his teachers. When he passed away, everyone knew how much Nafisa loved him as a student and respected him. So they took his body to Nafisa's house so that she could pray a separate janazah on him. Why? Because Imam al-Shafi'i used to constantly ask her for dua and ask her, to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive him. So they knew the relationship between Nafisa bint al-Hasan and al-Shafi'i. So on the way to the janazah, they took his body first to her and she prayed janazah on his body in her house alone. And then they took him to the masjid. And of course, it was absolutely packed. People came from all over to pray on him. And subhanAllah, the beautiful thing, by the way, is that his whole life, when he got to Egypt, his greatest regret was that he never got to meet an Imam Layth. So they buried him right next to an Imam Layth. So the grave of al-Shafi'i is actually next to Imam Layth. It's right around Masjid Amr bin As radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. He's buried over here. Okay, right outside the masjid essentially, where Imam Layth was buried as well. One of the things that's said about him, and Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the greatest Shafi'is of all time was Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala. He said that a Shafi'i used to carry a stick all the time. And people used to say to him, why do you carry a stick when you're healthy and you're not ill and you're not ailing? And he said to remember that we're only travelers in this world. So a Shafi'i always kept the sticks to sort of remember that I'm traveling in this world and that death is coming up. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed him, to have touched the world the way that he did, only to achieve all of this by the age of 54 years old, rahimahullah ta'ala. Now what is his madhab? And as I said, there is absolutely no doubt that al-Shafi'i's madhab is the most organized and balanced out of all four of the madhabs. There's no disputing that. Even if you don't belong to the Shafi'i madhab, you have to give him that. What were his usul? Obviously, the Quran and the Sunnah, just like Imam Malik. First, he looks to the Quran and he looks to the authentic ahadith. So, like Imam Malik, he will accept even a single chain of narration. Unlike Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, who needed a hadith to be mutawatir, to be widely narrated to accept it, a Shafi'i will accept any authentic hadith before any form of reasoning. And it's on the same level in legislation as the Quran. So he viewed the Quran and the Sunnah the same way as Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala. Now by the time al-Shafi'i takes over, al-Shafi'i sees that Medina now has been exposed to different ideas and things of that sort. So he didn't take the position of Malik on A'mal Ahl al-Madina, on the actions of the people of Medina, because different fiqh had come into Medina by that time. And it wasn't necessarily that they're going to be on the same thing that the Prophet ﷺ left behind. So he didn't necessarily take that. So instead he took al-Quran was Sunnah. He would not oppose the saying of a companion. Okay, so the ijma' of the companions, the consensus of the companions, and then looking at the individual opinions of the companions, like Abu Hanifa he will choose which one of them that he sees fit. And he liked the madhab of Ibn Abbas because he was from Mecca. His original fiqhi upbringing was the fiqh of Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu in Mecca. Unlike Imam Malik, he considered qiyas, so he did qiyas. He did analogy, he drew analogies. So he was able to take, if you will, the reliance on hadith from the madhab of Malik, but then to expand on the reasoning that Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala used to. So he used qiyas as a source of legislation, but he didn't go as far with the hypotheticals. So he also had his criticisms of going too far into the hypotheticals and instead using qiyas when it's necessary to use. He disregarded from the school of Abu Hanifa al-istihsan. So he said Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah mentioning that a person can choose, a scholar can choose even over qiyas to go with what his heart feels if he doesn't find the established proofs in the Quran and the Sunnah and so on and so forth. So he also didn't accept that. And Imam Shafi'i heavily criticized it. He even called it an innovation. So this was a point of contention between him and the Hanafis. But they still loved each other. That's the point here, that they had these very tense debates and they had these contentions with each other's methodologies. But Shafi'i was still admired by Shaybani and so on and so forth. And they still respected one another. As everyone has their famous opinions and things of that sort, I think probably the most famous opinion of Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala is al-qunut in Fajr Salah. Right? That if you go to any country where the Shafi'i madhab has taken over, or if you go to the Shafi'i villages, you'll find that they do qunut in every Salatul Fajr. Obviously, this is something that was narrated by the Prophet ﷺ. However, the other schools don't see it as, they would also see it as an innovation to do it every single Fajr. But it's pretty refreshing, subhanAllah, when you go to a country and things of that sort and you see an Imam with a beautiful voice and they're doing qunut, they're doing the dua in the second rak'ah of every single Fajr. But at the same time, again, a ta'assub, even if you pray in sometimes the fanatical following, even if you pray in like an airport. I remember being in a country and, we were all about to miss our flight. And there was a Shafi'i brother amongst us, and he led the salah. And he had to do the qunut. And like our flight was a matter of 30 seconds. And he even sped through like Qul Huwallahu Ahad and Qul A'udhu Birabbil Falaq in the salah, but he had to do the qunut. So a lot of times holding on to these things is what becomes an issue, but that was one of his famous opinions, rahimahullah ta'ala, which was the qunut in al-Fajr. So the books in Shafi'i madhab, obviously you have you have al-Risala, which we talked about. And then you have what Imam al-Muzani wrote. Okay, and this is beautiful. Imam al-Muzani basically summarized all of the books of Shafi'i. We said he wrote over 100 books. Al-Muzani wrote something that's called al-Mukhtasar, the summary. And he summarized all of Shafi'i's opinions, all of his madhabs, classing this as al-Madhab al-Qadim, al-Madhab al-Jadid. This is what he used to say in Iraq. This is what he started to say in Egypt and so on and so forth. This is what he said towards the end of his life. So you'll find this terminology in the Shafi'i madhab, the old madhab of Shafi'i and the new madhab of Shafi'i. Also, obviously, you find Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala wrote greatly in the Shafi'i madhab. And Imam al-Nawawi is one of the most prized students, obviously. Imam al-Nawawi is perhaps like the most productive scholar in history, right? And he wrote about the fiqh of Imam al-Shafi'i. He wrote a book called Al-Maqasid, so somewhat on the legal theory of Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, and he wrote Rawdat al-Talibin also. And then you find, by the way, that there are multiple writings where they brought the Shafi'i madhab into the explanation of hadith. So Imam al-Nawawi obviously explains a hadith as well. He does a sharh of Sahih Muslim, and he mentions, some of the things that Shafi'i opined on, the opinions of Shafi'i on these different ahadith. And Imam al-Ghazali was also a Shafi'i. So al-Ghazali also, contributed to the spread of the Shafi'i madhab later on. And Imam Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah, the author of Fath al-Bari, is a Shafi'i. So Fath al-Bari is the greatest explanation of Sahih al-Bukhari. And Imam al-Dhahabi, rahimahullah, who writes Siyar A'lam al-Nubula, the biography of the nobles, he's a Shafi'i as well. Ibn Kathir is a Shafi'i, As-Suyuti is a Shafi'i, Al-Mawardi is a Shafi'i, Al-Imam al-Bayhaqi is a Shafi'i. So he had a lot of support in all of the different sciences, if you will, because these scholars really achieved great positions in all of the different sciences. And again, Ibn Hajar tried to prove that Imam al-Bukhari was a Shafi'i. Okay, but al-Bukhari was a madhab of himself. Right? And everyone tried to claim al-Bukhari, but at the end of the day, al-Bukhari really was a madhab of himself. The biographies of a Shafi'i, therefore, were written very early on. Okay? The first biography that was written about an Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala was actually written by Dawood al-Zahiri. Remember how we said there's a third approach to fiqh that existed at that time, the literalist approach? Dawood used to be a student of a Shafi'i. So he actually left the Shafi'i and took a more, took a more hardcore approach to being a literalist and things of that sort. And then you had al-Bayhaqi. And Imam al-Bayhaqi rahimahullah wrote, the thing about al-Bayhaqi is that al-Bayhaqi is a scholar in hadith as well, right? So al-Bayhaqi wrote the biography of a Shafi'i, and he used the hadith style where he used chains of narration and narrating the biography of a Shafi'i. So it's the most authentic, and it's one of the most beautiful biographies of a Shafi'i. And An-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, in almost every work of An-Nawawi, he thanked Imam al-Shafi'i. Even though he never met him, he writes some sort of tribute to Imam al-Shafi'i in the beginning of his work. So his madhab spread far. It spread through, we said that one of the famous Shafi'is, by the way, was Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi rahimahullah ta'ala. And Salah ad-Din was a pretty hardcore Shafi'i, all right, to say the least. Salah ad-Din, when he went somewhere, he spread the Shafi'i madhab with him. So he brought it to Egypt, he brought it to Sham, he brought it to Syria, he took it to some of the southern parts of Africa. And again, in Egypt, oh man, I lost it again. All right, in Egypt, I despise this thing so much. So it went to Abyssinia, Ethiopia, it went to Sudan, and then it went to subparts of India. In India, by the way, there are still some very strong Shafi'i pockets in India until now. Okay, and it tends to be in the southern part of India. And then Indonesia, the biggest Muslim country in the world, is a Shafi'i country. In Malaysia, don't you dare talk about Shafi'i fiqh in Malaysia. You will not disagree with Imam Shafi'i there, right? They're all, mashallah, very, very strict followers of the Shafi'i madhab in Malaysia. So it spread to many parts. It spread to Yemen as well. It spread even to Sri Lanka. The Muslims in Sri Lanka tend to be Shafi'is as well. So it spread through many different parts of the world. It has still its pockets till today in Asham. So Asham, if you kind of zoom in there to Syria, in the area of Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, and Jordan, you have some Hanafis and some Shafi'is. So you kind of still have some survival of both of those madhabs over there. But again, what makes his methodology so prominent is that Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, he wrote his own books, he explained his own fiqh, and that's just multiple things that even Somalia, by the way, ended up taking it. So it just spread through multiple forms, multiple great Imams and so on and so forth. And then political conquest. The Shafi'is and the Hanafis in history were always at odds. Even today on prayer calendars, they're at odds, aren't they? Yeah. Right? You've got H and S, except S means standard apparently, right? It doesn't mean, everyone always thinks it's the Hanafi Asr or the Shafi'i Asr, all right? So they even fight with each other on the prayer calendars. No, but on a serious level, most of the Khulafa tended to be, in history, either Hanafi or Shafi'i. And so they adopted one of those two methodologies, and then just politically it spread through as a result of that. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy upon him. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward him for his effort. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to join us with him, with the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Salihin in Jannat al-Firdaus. Allahumma ameen. And then obviously you guys are studying a diwan to some extent, the poetry of a Shafi'i. So it's obviously another way. It doesn't matter what madhab you belong to. The diwan of a Shafi'i is an epic work. It's an amazing work that we can all find benefit in.